Great to be here at the Wheeler Centre to talk about the suburbs. And you might see that the title of this is sort of segued slightly from sustainability to a resilient future. And these presentations I started doing in 2003 as a response to the idea that the suburbs were a lost wasteland that we would never be able to maintain in an era of climate change and expensive energy. We've always had the view from a permaculture point of view that the suburbs are a place that is amenable to adaptation to what we call the low energy future, where we will be living more lightly on the planet because we will have to. Primarily because of permanently expensive and unreliable energy and resource supply, but probably driven the way it is being driven elsewhere in the world right at this moment by financial instability and a crash in asset values, the primary one of which in Australia is, of course, our suburban houses. So I do agree in many ways with the American author Howard Kunstler, who said America invested all of its post-war wealth in a form of living that has no future, suburbia. And yet, I believe suburbia is incrementally adaptable to the world we're facing. So how will we cope with this energy descent future where resources will be more expensive, where we'll have ongoing climate change, even if we reduce our carbon emissions dramatically, and an economic system that is not continually growing, in fact one that is likely to be in free fall perhaps for quite a lot longer than it was in the 1930s. I took this photo in front of a car yard in North Carolina in 2005, and obviously I was focusing on the man in the cart, horse and cart. He's certainly an Amish gentleman, and he's almost certainly a farmer, someone involved in growing food. And maybe there's an iconic contrast there with the no, it's not Hungry Jack's, it's Burger King, isn't it, in the background. So a lot of the future is, of course, about how we are going to provide for basic needs closer to where people live in a slower, smaller scale way. And from a permaculture point of view, we see that there's huge opportunities from this energy descent future. The higher prices for natural resources will drive energy conservation and renewable development, boost agriculture and rural economies, and it will allow low input and organic farming to compete against intensive land uses. Now, this reduced mobility of people and goods which flows from this will tend to make local products more competitive than imported ones, and this is actually already happening in many parts of the world. Of course, with the Australian dollar constantly going up, we've actually here, for the time being, got the opposite. It'll stimulate self-reliance, repair, retrofit and recycling, not because these things are seen as socially progressive, but just because they're more economic. And it'll increase community interaction and exchange. Now, a lot of this won't necessarily be positive, but at least people will be talking to their neighbours again, maybe only because they can't get away from them. And the key thing is that it'll restart what we call the household and local community economies. This is the stuff that's outside the monetary formal economies, that has always been an economic foundation of every society in history. It's just in the supercharged decades of affluence we've managed to suck it dry and shift everything up into the monetary economy. And when you get economic contraction, it's just natural people start doing things again at home and on an exchange basis. We call this the relocalisation process, which has been very strongly associated with the transition towns movement. This relocalisation will shift power and respect to older and rural people with self-reliant skills, people who can work physically. Gee, that'd be a turnaround, wouldn't it? And people who are applying permaculture principles, whether they are doing that consciously or unconsciously. So the way I want to look at this is actually through taking us down a suburban street, Ozzie Street. It could have been the street some of us grew up in. It's certainly a lot of the street I grew up in suburban Western Australia is in this place. But it could equally be places I've lived in Northcote or many of the middle suburbs that were developed in the post-war era. And I want to track the changes that happen, both as a sort of a historical record of what was really going on in suburbia rather than this vision we have of it now, and how it could adapt. And I suppose this comes out of growing up in the suburbs in the 50s and 60s. By the age of about 13, I think, I came to the conclusion that way of life was the most unsustainable, profligate way of living that had ever existed. Okay, a lot of other authors and commentators who came to the same conclusion. But by the 1990s, on permaculture design courses, I was teaching that the suburbs of the 50s and 60s might be a model of sustainability we could aspire to. Because in fact, we'd moved so much in the wrong direction in those succeeding decades. So, I'll jump straight to Aussie Street. Well, no, I shouldn't go there because it doesn't come up correctly. So we do have to understand the history, read the landscape, look at the obstacles, but sidestep them and grasp the opportunities. So we'll start in Aussie Street in the golden age of suburbia. So in number one, Fred and Joan live there, and they're a married couple. They've got no kids, but their Joan's unmarried sister, Ethel, lives with them. And they've got the shed and the Hills hoist in the backyard. They've got a garage and a car and a gravel driveway. And they've got the chooks and the veggie garden and the fruit trees and lawn and ornamental garden out the front. Meanwhile, over at number two, Harold and Marge have actually got 3 kids there, and they've got sort of most of the same things. It's the usual suburban house of that time, 140 square metres, a veranda out the back and a porch, probably built on the sort of war service loans after the Second World War. They've got the car and the carport and the veggies and fruit trees. They're a little bit more less gung-ho about watering their whole backyard to create lawn. And over in number 3, Sid and Sue have got 5 kids, and you heard the dog. And he's a mechanic and works out of the backyard, and they've actually got 2 cars, which is not surprising. They're not really much into gardening, though they've got the Hills hoist. You can see the sort of minimalist bit of lawn. And they planted this funny gum tree in the middle of the backyard. Don't know why, but anyway. And now, over in number 4, we're not sure where Mario and Angela are from. I think they're Italians. Anyway, they don't have a car. But they've got the biggest veggie garden of all and fruit trees, but they sort of have a lawn, but they've got a goat that eats the lawn. And then out the front, they've got this olive grove, you know, which is like really weird in the front garden. So if we look at this, in Aussie Street, on a 1/4 acre block with 4 houses, there's 20 people living there. That's 50 people per hectare. And the floor area that's occupied by building space that can't be used for other productive use is only 560 square metres. So that's 28 square metres per person. And this is sort of like when Australia was one of the richest countries in the world and we were riding on the sheep's back. We were, in fact, the richest country in the world, along with Argentina in 1900, and we were probably still pretty close to it then. Now, as we move on into the 60s and 70s, the rising affluence and additions, things have changed a little bit in Aussie Street. Fred and Joan and Ethel are still there, but actually Ethel, who's a nun, has actually gone off to be a missionary in New Guinea, I think. So there's one less person there. But they have enclosed the back veranda to have a little more sort of built-in space. Next door, Harold and Marge have actually got a new car, and at number 3, they've enclosed the back veranda. Remember, they've got 5 kids, so they're sort of bulging all over the place, and they've got a new car. And, well, actually, Mario and Angela have got their first car. They used to ride their bicycles to the factory to work the double shifts that they did. And the Water Authority has just put in the sewer main, replacing the septic tanks down the back. And the council has put in curb and channel along the front of the street, and they've planted trees, native trees actually, and they've called it the Nature Strip. Don't know really where that came from. Anyway, so, oh wait a minute, what's happened at number 3? Sid's split with the floozy, and Sue is left with the 5 kids and she can't afford the mortgage, so she leaves too, and there's a new owners, Greg and Ruth, with 3 kids move in. And they're really keen on native plants. Actually, they liked the big gum tree in the backyard. And then they planted all these native trees all over the place. In fact, they cut down the ornamental garden at the front and planted native trees there as well. And they've built the sort of double garage games room down the back and concreted the driveway. Now, they got rid of the Hills hoist and got the clothes dryer because the gum tree was actually dropping all the leaves on the Hills hoist, and there was, you know, too much shade anyway. So now, over at number 4, the double shifts in the factory are really getting to Mario and Angela, and their kids are a bit spoilt brats, and so they actually give up on the veggies and the fruit trees, but they have done a big addition out the back, a renovation. And it's now down to the solitary olive tree, the symbolic olive tree out the front, because they don't even have time to pick all the olives. So, they also had a dispute with the neighbours, a horrendous argument, so they planted this cypress hedge down the side, on the north side, which sort of takes all the light, but anyway. So yeah, north that way, if you can see on the diagram. Okay, so Aussie Street is down to 17 people, and you know, but the amount of floor space per person is up to 39. So it's more filled in. There's less home economic activity going on, but there's a lot more capital investment, both public in the infrastructure and private. So if we move on to the 1990s, which is the ageing and infill era, Fred and Joan are getting pretty old, but they're still hanging in there at number 1. But they've given up on the veggies and the chooks, and it's just unwatered, mown grass up the back. Now, at number 2, Harold and Marge are actually in poor health and are moving to the nursing home. Actually, wait a minute, the gum tree's not very healthy either. It's died. Oh well. And over at number 3, Greg and Ruth are the empty nest baby boomers, and they're retiring to Queensland. Now, their native garden has now grown to a sort of a huge forest. And over at number 4, a new developer owner has moved in, cut everything down, cut down the cypress hedge, trashed the carport, and put a brick veneer development in the back, just as progressive government policies have been encouraging developers to do. And then they concrete most of the backyard, and of course the runoff is so large that there's a mandated stormwater detention system, a big tank that then leaks the water away so it doesn't overload the street stormwater system, and there's a drip irrigated ornamental garden put in. And okay, Vivian moves into the front apartment. She's a working mother with 2 teenage kids, though no one's actually seen the teenagers. They're sort of couch potatoes. You don't actually sort of see them in daylight. And in the back there's Nigel and Rebecca, who are a working couple. They've got no kids, but they've got 2 dogs. So if we look, Ozzie Street is now down to 11 people, but the floor area is up to 840 square metres. And so that's 76 square metres per person. So we can sort of see where this is going. But what if energy is in decline? A falling energy base shrinks the economy, financial crisis, falling house values, brings the problems back home, shrinking services, rising costs, crime, and current urban development strategies fail because they're basically driven by constantly rising real estate values. But of course there's a lot of positives. It drives creative adaptation and innovation, helps overcome obsessions and addictions, and it renews community spirit. So how does this look in Aussie Street? So we're in the late 2000s permaculture retrofit, and the story here gets a little bit complicated. Fred and Joan are still hanging on in number 1. They're getting pretty elderly now. And at number 2 is the only unrenovated house in this part of the street. It's still like it was in the 50s. There's still a few fruit trees out the back, but it's basically the gardens have all sort of died in the drought otherwise. And Oliver and Alicia, who are a young couple with a baby, move in based on she got a bit of an inheritance and they could just manage to buy this place. Now, Oliver's gung-ho permie who really wants to show that you could actually earn a living from micro-farming in the suburbs. So he starts off with a nursery where he's growing all this tree stock, and the old carport is his nursery, and his nursery stock is in the driveway. Now, he's selling it off the street. Now, he doesn't have a permit for this from the council, but anyway, that's what he's doing. They don't have a lot of money, but they sort of got the chook house and tool store down the back with the straw yard, and they start off with this serious, intensive veggie gardening system where they're using chooks as part of it. And he's selling a few boxes, a few veggie boxes to people he knows. They get the water tank, a little rainwater tank, just to collect a bit of drinking water off the roof. And then with other savings, they put in a big water tank, a greenhouse, shade house. So, you know, doing things slowly, bits and pieces, fill in the old chook run with a whole lot more subtropical trees. And they've got the sort of herb garden out the front. Well, actually, they've planted a fruit and a nut tree on the nature strip. And they've done this little water diversion thing, a little bit of concrete in the gutter to just divert the street water off onto those trees. Now, they didn't put in specifications to the Shire engineer to do that, but anyway, it seems to be, not a problem. Now, over at number 3, this comes up for sale, and I think it's Oliver's mate, Gareth, he's coming back from overseas after being away for a long time, and he's moving back in with his, talking about setting up house with his parents. And so Ian and Andrea, the parents, they've got a bit of capital behind them and they buy this place so the young folks can be together. Now, Gareth is a bit of a tech head more than the sort of horticulturalist, and he was attracted by the big double garage up the back, and he sets that up as a metalworking shop, and they've got photovoltaics, grid feedback on the roof, and then they take down the fence between the two blocks. So this concrete driveway actually becomes the access for sort of both of the blocks. Now, wait a minute, what's going on? Oh shit, they're logging the native garden because there's no sun at all in the garden, and they want to do this passive solar retrofit addition, and they want to grow food, so they've actually logged the backyard, and they've got this big stack of firewood there, and sort of plant a few more appropriate native shrubs along the back. But, you know, they're serious about this and got a bit of capital. So there's the big rainwater tank, which is actually collecting water off both roofs of both houses, and big grey water treatment system that's taking all the grey water from both houses. And as I said, they've got a bit of capital and they've invested in this passive solar 12 square eco retrofit. You know, it's got the great pergolas around it and you know, a little bits and pieces, but they take in a boarder who's a single mum with a baby, Jodie. Now, there is some talk that Gareth and Jodie are a number, but not sort of really sure about that. So, and they pull down the old falling down porch and turn it into a greenhouse, which really makes the old part of the house a lot more energy efficient. And the young folks decided like a veranda out the street would be good. And a few other little additions. Well, actually, they're having a street party. And they've built a bread oven. You know, you've got to use all that firewood somehow. So they've got a bread oven built on the street. You know, they've got a bit of a garden, but as I said, they're not really... None of them are sort of gardeners, and Oliver next door, he actually sort of manages the garden for them. Oh wait a minute, the native street tree mysteriously died too, and well, it was overshadowing the kitchen garden and like sucking all the moisture out of the ground, and oh well, it's been replaced with some fruit and nut trees. And there's some nut trees down the driveway. Oh, wait a minute, this is a bit contentious. The Hills hoist has made a return. Well, actually, the two young mothers were complaining about the lack of grass, and they commandeered a small space off the veggie gardens to actually, so the babies could sort of crawl around on the grass outside, since everywhere else was full of productive stuff. Yeah, what happens next? Oh yeah, well they've got this big compost bays up the back because the shared driveway allows them to get in. And as I said, they didn't have much money, but they noticed that the greenhouse replacing the porch over at Ian and Andrea's was incredibly successful, so they did that to their place as well. And the people count in Aussie Street is creeping back up. It's up to 15. There's a lot more floor space, but there's starting to be more productive activity going on. So let's move this on to, we are now at 2015 and we're in the second Great Depression. So how does this process like move from number 2 and 3 to, if you like, creatively colonise number 1 and 4. Now, number 1 always looked like pretty fertile territory, especially from the point of view of Oliver, because he was looking at that backyard and he desperately needed space to expand for his veggie box systems. He had more customers than he could supply. And they were pretty worried about Fred and Joan because the help that there had been from the local council had been cancelled with the cutbacks. So, you know, they're pretty much on their own there. Over at number 4, it always looked like a harder nut to crack there, you know, absentee owners, tenants, all built over, but we'll see. So, yeah, in exchange for supplying them with veggies, he actually takes over the backyard and he can sort of just extend his chooks straight out into that system. And one of his customers, Megan, who's actually getting sick and tired of working in the health system, which is falling apart left, right and centre, she sort of gets to know Fred and Joan, and she's trying to downsize and decides to move in. So she's the informal carer with them. So there's now 3 people at number 1. And over at number 3, actually, no, Gareth and Jodie weren't a number, but Nisha, Gareth's pregnant girlfriend, has actually moved in because her job has disappeared. And so, yeah, the numbers of people are building up there. And wait a minute, there's been a mortgage foreclosure sale at number 4. And so there's big things going on. And then the person who bought it, then the values dropped further and there was a second mortgage sale. Well, wait a minute. Someone's can't afford to pay the electricity and the gas and it's been disconnected. And yeah, Vivian's left, not sure really where she went. So the front at number 4 is now empty. And in that situation, somehow there's a fire. And it's basically trashed and demolished. Now, Nigel and Rebecca are still in the back, but they end up leaving at short notice. Not really quite sure why, but one of their dogs did kill a whole lot of the chooks down at number 1, and I think Oliver actually poisoned the dog. But we don't know whether that was why they left. And the squatters have moved in up the back. Now, this is getting really serious. The land values are dropping further, and there's a 3rd mortgage sale, and Ian and Andrea have actually got the money and bought the place for $20,000. Okay, it's a bit of a squalor at the back, and you've got all these people actually living in there. Well, it turns out they're pretty feral, but they're actually this bicycle repair collective. It's sort of Kit, Lance, Seb and Lisa, and they sort of come to an arrangement with the owners, and of course they've got a connection with Gareth because they want his actually use of his metalworking workshop for the more difficult stuff on the bicycles that they can't do. So they've got the double garage, that becomes the repair workshop, and the owner's put in another big tank. It's actually got a pump, a salvage sump pump in the stormwater detention system that pumps up to the new tank. And they put a greenhouse on the front. Now, actually, I think the bicycle collective have taken it over and they're not growing veggies, actually. I think they're growing dope. But anyway, well, what do you know? The vacant space in the middle has got a goat in it again. So it's got an electric fence round it. And, oh, wait a minute, the chainsaw's going again. Need more fuel and need to grow more food. Meanwhile, back at number 1, actually, Fred and Joan, Fred died and Joan's actually still there, but she's actually bequeathed the whole place to Megan. And after Fred went, Joan only lasted another another 3 months, and she died. And Megan set up a sort of an eco-travellers home, and at the moment there's 4 visitors there. And they're doing a bit of a sort of a retrofit of the place along the same lines, but actually it's Oliver who's driving next door, who's driving it. There's a big polytunnel greenhouse, and the garage has been retrofitted with a straw bale build out that's now the cool store for his expanded CSA thing. So a lot of these changes, of course, and there's beehives out the front. Now the security situation is getting pretty poor, and they've had a lot of sort of nursery stock stolen, but the beehives out the front don't seem to be a problem. I don't know why, but no one's stolen the honey from the beehives. So Ozzie Street is now back up to 20 people. The floor area is down to 640 square metres, and that's 34 square metres per person. And there's a lot going on, and it's a lot better than what's happening in a lot of other suburbs elsewhere. So sorry for taking so long, but I hope that has painted some of the picture of what we see as a very serious and possible transition. Thank you.